If you look at sort of the pre-Christian paganism he is describing, there is, on the one hand, a certain gulf between the elites who believe at a philosophical level and, the ordinary people sacrificing to Zeus or Apollo. But at the same time, there is also was also a certain amount of natural relationship, right, where the skeptical elites would nonetheless participate in the civic rituals, and it was seen as normal to have ordinary people believing in the gods, even if you yourself didn't, right? I mean, I may be,
but that's probably
neither of us are actual historians of 3rd century BC paganism, so the audience should take all this with a grain of salt. But I wonder now, right, that what Tara's describing, and particularly sort of the closer it gets to sort of specific supernatural belief, the closer you get to hexes and curses and rituals that are actually trying to accomplish something in the real world, the more completely alien it is to the sort of Ronald Dworkin, right? The sort of intellectual elites you're describing as pagan. And I'm not sure that's necessary. I sort of think that there is maybe more coherence in a kind of pantheistic world picture and less coherence in a secular materialist world picture than you. But it's definitely the case sociologically. And do you think that that's just sort of a permanent fact ushered in by scientific revolutions and so on? Like when does the Harvard faculty decide that they can be in the same camp with the people studying how to curse?
Yeah. So, I don't want to say that couldn't happen because people are surprising and history is surprising and so forth. My friends at the current, I think, would any such suggestion, say, I see you on the way to, joining up with some Wiccan chapter or something like that, would think that that's just absolutely absurd. That's preposterous and so forth. And there is this difference, I think, between the current situation and the ancient one, and that is, I think, you were sort of suggesting this, and I think you're right, that the philosophical paganism of Marcus Varro or of some of Cicero's characters and so forth kind of grows out of a healthy, more active, concrete paganism that's developed over centuries. And it's one thing, I think, for someone to come out of a culture like that, where a very concrete form of religion with all kinds of sacrifices and maybe largely believed stories about deities and so forth is taken for granted, and then become sort of skeptically moved to want to hold on to that in a philosophical sense, but not really being able to, and still being able to coexist, kind of live and even support that kind of thing. That's one thing. That happened then, I think. I think some of that, and I want to be cautious here because people are different, and I know this is just a generalization. Some of that with liberal Christianity, I think, might be another instance of that, where there was a more concrete commitment to what the fundamentalists would have said were fundamentals, the virgin birth, the resurrection, the literal resurrection, things like that. And then some liberal Christians were able to sort of hold on to those things as expressive of, certain underlying truths, though not to be taken seriously. That's one thing. The question now, I think, is can it go the other way? Can you go from sort of a scientific naturalist culture and then actually start believing in, whatever the different deities or rituals, maybe, again, because I think people do surprising things, but that seems to be more difficult to do. So that's why I'm less confident that that's going to emerge as some kind of religion that will really bring people together around paganism or pantheism.
But there's a bridge, though, of sort of performative, right, where you have people who don't, I've known these people, and people who don't abandon scientific naturalism in any formal way. They say, well, we need ritual, and I want to sort of experiment with ritual as an experiential thing without necessarily believing in the great god Pan. And how much of just in the case of sort of astrology and the occult, right? how much do people practicing these things now, millennials, Zoomers, whoever, believe versus how much do they perform?
I think it's an impossible question to answer, and I think that the furthermore, I think
that's what we specialize in at the American Enterprise Institute.
The boundaries between the two of them are quite blurred, which is to say, if you are performing a ritual, if you are sort of socially identifying yourself in such a way, if you are experiencing some sort of collective effervescence, as it were, in practicing a ritual, how would you measure it? Do you ask people, do you believe? Do you, measure their brainwaves? I think it's not just simply that's impossible to answer, but impossible to measure. That said, I do want to suggest that there might be a more of a bridge than we might think between a kind of, to get us to the great god Pan. And the way that I think about it is that this language of energy, this language of force, or the force, if we want to get all Star Wars about it, is very
It's only midichlorians, though. Like, there's a scientific explanation
I'm sorry,
for the force.
my nerdery stopped there. You're beyond me. But I am, the language of energy as a kind of spiritualized, but kind of scientific, but kind of there, but we don't want to talk too much about it, that pervades wellness culture. You go to SoulCycle, and up there with don't talk on your phone is other writers are affected by your energy. Please don't look at people, please help lean into the system so that we're all vibrating at the same frequency. If you buy plenty of wellness products, there's a whole sort of expel the toxins and the toxic energy. It's sometimes used in sort of a psychological way, but it's often used in this as a placeholder. It's a stopgap for this sort of spiritual thing that's kind of about one another and kind of about the world, and it's kind of out there, and it's real. It is ontologically real, but it's not defined. And I think insofar as many of the people who are performatively, you might say, hexing Brett Kavanaugh or hexing Donald Trump or doing such rituals, they may say, sure, I do not believe in the literal existence of the god Pan as described in classical myth. They are, however, much more likely to say something along the lines of there is an energy that is out there that is real, that is best described with this metaphorical language, but the energy is real, even if the deity in its particularity is not. And I think that's kind of how the way in which one could get to sort of a more established vision of paganism is through the idea that these are rituals that help, these are rituals that help us tap into the primal energy within us all, and we can. And I think one of the reasons that mixing and matching is so culturally acceptable among this demographic is because fundamentally there's the assumption that it's all kind of manifestations with almost no real difference between one and the other of something sort of primordial and non-personal behind it. At least that's my take.
So let me, before we open